So now we're going to talk about some of the major homeostatic imbalances of the nervous system. Starting with meningitis. If you remember what the meninges are the connective tissue layers that surround the brain and spinal cord. Itis means inflammation of. So inflammation of the meninges. In other words, this is an infection of predominantly the cerebrospinal fluid and surrounding areas that surround the brain and spinal cord. Symptoms mimic the flu, but also include fever, severe headache, neck stiffness and pain, avoidance of bright lights and sounds, and etc. The key here is the neck pain that would happen. And this is usually the predominant symptom of patients. This is diagnosed by a lumbar tap, but it can lead to death or other complications. And this is treated with antibiotics or antifungals if it's fungal infection. And if it's a virus, usually there's no treatment unless indicated because of the severity of the infection. So meningitis can be caused by any microorganism that gets into that cerebrospinal fluid that surrounds the brain and spinal cord. And different types of infectious agents can cause different severities of disease. Usually viral meningitis is much less severe than the other forms because the other forms recruit neutrophils to the area. And we'll learn about what neutrophils do, but they're basically like gobblers. So they're going to gobble up all of the microorganisms that are present. But in the process, those neutrophils only live for a couple days. So when they die, they leave behind the dead cell mass, and that leads to the formation of pus. So if you have pus accumulating inside of your central nervous system, that's usually not the best. So lots of toxic waste can be left behind, and that can exacerbate the infection and make it a little bit more severe. So usually viral meningitis is much more mild. Paralysis. So paralysis is the loss of nerve function to a particular region of the body. In hemiplegia, half of the body is paralyzed, and that can sometimes be seen in stroke patients where half of the body or maybe just half of the face is not able to be moved. Paraplegia is when usually just the legs, so two appendages, so the legs are non-functional. Triplegia is both legs and one arm. And quadriplegia is both legs and both arms. So if we draw a stick figure here, I am a terrible artist, so the stick figure is even going to look bad. So we have I, and he's sad because somebody comes in and severs the spinal cord. Now, whenever the spinal cord is severed, the point below that is going to be paralyzed. So if we sever in the middle of the back, everything below that point is going to be paralyzed. If we sever up in the neck here, everything below that point is going to be paralyzed. So it depends on the point of injury that determines the amount that's going to be non-functional. With triplegia, this person must be really unlucky because likely they would have something severed here and then something severed to only one of the arms. So it would affect the branches that are coming out of the brachial plexus of one arm. So moving on to dementia and Alzheimer's disease. Dementia is any degenerative brain disease. Dementia can be temporary, like if an elderly patient has a UTI, they can suffer temporary confusion or dementia, or it can be permanent. But any degenerative brain disease, including Parkinson's disease, Huntington's disease, they're all considered forms of dementia. Alzheimer's disease is a specific type of dementia or a specific type of brain degenerative disease that leads to dementia. And with Alzheimer's disease, we usually call this the plaques and tangles. Garbage basically accumulates inside of the neurons of the brain, and that leads to the formation of plaques, which are like scar-like tissue, and tangles, which you can see garbage accumulating on the inside of the brain cells, and that leads to degeneration of memory regions in the brain, eventually leading to the degeneration of the parts of the brain that regulate your normal organ function, and that's what people end up dying from, is organ failure. Huntington disease is another disease that has to do with brain degeneration. In the case of Huntington's disease, this is an inherited disease. You have involuntary movements that progress to severe dementia and death, but it's due to an accumulation of this protein called Huntington, and that is an inherited disorder. In Parkinson's disease, you have degeneration of the nerve pathways, which prevents the secretion of dopamine, so acetylcholine is not blocked, and patients have involuntary skeletal muscle spasms. So you have a neuron that branches and leads to a muscle. And when it innervates the muscle, it's going to secrete out acetylcholine, ACH, and that's going to tell the muscle contract. Dopamine comes in and blocks the effects of acetylcholine. So eventually, you're going to stop contracting this muscle. But if dopamine is blocked, then acetylcholine remains in this synapse and it keeps telling your muscles to contract. Patients with Parkinson's disease have rigidity and trembling of the head, rigidity and trembling of the extremities, shuffling gait with short steps, reduced arm swing, and a forward tilt of the trunk. And again, this degeneration of nerve pathways can lead to more severe issues, including death. And what we've been able to do is we've been able to take stem cells out of the bone marrow of a patient and inject them into their brains. And once we put those stem cells from that person into their brain, they are able to regrow these or regenerate these neuroglia cells, these supporting cells in the brain, and that decreases the disability of the patient. So just by using their own stem cells that exist in their bone marrow, they're able to decrease the disability. And it's shown a lot of promise in Parkinson's disease, but not so much in Alzheimer's or in Huntington's disease. CRUETZFELD-JAKOB's disease. If you've ever heard of bovine spongiform encephalopathy, which I highly doubt, but you've probably heard of mad cow disease or chronic wasting disease in deer. Those types of diseases are caused by prions, and prions are infectious proteins. That's all they are, is a little protein that's self-replicating. It gets inside of the nervous system tissue and it starts replicating rapidly. Once it's there, it can convert normal proteins to non-functional proteins, and then you have these microglial cells that come and try to eat up the debris. In the process, they cause damage, which ends up leading to the formation of these lesions. So we call it a spongiform encephalopathy. Encephal is referring to the brain. Atopy is a disease. Spongy form is exactly what it sounds like. It's spongy in nature. And with all these holes accumulating in the brain, it's basically like going through all of the stages of Alzheimer's, but instead of it taking 10 years or more, it takes 1 to 2 months max. So when someone starts to have the replication of these proteins and starts to exhibit some of the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, they rapidly progress to dementia and death. There is no cure. There's no way to diagnose this for sure until the brain is autopsied, and it's a very rapid death. Good thing for us is it's not very common, but there is some association with people that are eating nervous tissue from animals that are infected. In the United States, we screen all of our animals for these types of diseases so that we keep this out of the general food supply. But if you go kill a deer and then think it's cool to eat the brain tissue and that deer happen to have chronic wasting disease, there is a possibility that you could be consuming those prion-like proteins, which could get into your nervous system tissue and cause this disease in you. Hasn't been well documented, and there's no for sure cause or cases that have existed, but there's just a strong possibility of that happening. So with these prion diseases, again, they're infectious proteins. CRUETZFELD-JAKOB's disease is the human form of this. It's kind of the human mad cow disease type deal. And I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but CRUETZFELD-JAKOB disease does have a heritable component. So this does run in families. So if you know that this runs in your family, usually you just do not have children, because there's always a 50-50 chance that your children will end up having it. Even if you have children with someone that doesn't have this in their family, it's a 50-50 chance. Seizures. So seizures are sudden bursts of abnormal neuronal activity in the brain. Many seizures arise from some type of scar or focal point in the brain. And seizures can come in a variety of different forms. So you can have febrile seizures, which only occur when in children usually, children ages 5 and under, and when they get a fever, they happen to get a seizure, and then after the fever breaks, they're fine and the seizures go away. But every time then that they get a seizure, or fever, they end up getting a seizure. This was the case of my son Jonathan. He had one of these when he was 1 year old, and then had one at 1.5, and then they went away for him. So he was kind of lucky with that. Those febrile seizures tend to run in families, so there is a heritable component to the development of those seizures. Me personally, I had seizures until I was 12, and they were always induced by a fever, and they thought it was really unusual that I had seizures for so long, because usually by age 5 you grow out of those types of seizures. But I had my last seizure when I was 12 years old, and again it was associated with a fever, and after that point I started developing migraines. So now about every 6 months my brain just tells me to, go lay down and I'm done for the night. And basically I end up with a severe migraine and I have to take medication, all that type of stuff. So the seizures stopped for me, but now I get these migraine headaches every 6 months. So that's kind of febrile seizures. Next is an actual seizure disorder. So when you have a seizure disorder, we usually call that epilepsy. And there's different types of epilepsy. So if you have a chronic seizure disorder, like I said, that's true epilepsy. The cause is usually unknown. We used to think that it may be a miscommunication between the two hemispheres. And in radical cases of seizures where you have like these huge grand mal seizures where your body is convulsing to the point of breaking your own bones or biting your own tongue off and that type of stuff, and they're happening really frequently and they're affecting your quality of life. They did this procedure for a while, and I'm not sure if they still do it, but where they actually cut the corpus callosum, and that stops the communication between the two hemispheres of the brain. This is only in dire situations. The person can still live when you cut their brain in half, but they have to relearn how to do a lot of activities. So the left and the right side of the brain are both communicating in order to be able to recognize someone or to be able to say the name of something. So when that gets cut, you're still able to recognize it, you're just not necessarily able to give a name to it. So you have to relearn all of those different activities, which takes many, many, many years to recover from this. But if you're having grand mal seizures every week and you're breaking your own bones and being hospitalized, that may be the best treatment option as to quality of life for you. Treatment also includes anticonvulsive drugs. My nephew has epilepsy, and he's been 1 year seizure-free, so that's great for him. With his seizures, he just loses his facial expression, and you really don't even know that he's having a seizure. He just kind of stares off into space for a little while, and then all of a sudden he wakes up and has really disoriented, really confused, and cries, and doesn't really know what happened to him. So he is on anticonvulsive drugs so that he can decrease the likelihood that he's going to have another seizure.